everyone. Today let's discuss about the integration of Spring Framework with other web frameworks. Myself Nagashri, I am your Spring Framework tutor. So the agenda for today, let's know about the agenda for today. The agenda for today is overview of the JSF framework. Why we need to know JSF framework is when we are integrating the Spring with other framework, that is JSF framework, we should have a little bit, at least the outline or how it appears, some understanding or knowledge about the JSF framework and what all the features it consists of and what are all the commonalities. Next is structs framework. So what is structs framework, what it consists of, and how the integration of the Spring framework with the structs framework happens, because some of the projects may involve this integration as well due to the additional features. So now today first let's understand the basic introduction on the integration of Spring with other frameworks. Why it is being done? Why do we have to integrate? What are all its advantages? Let's know about that. First, we all know the fact that Spring Framework is the most popular framework, and if we want to develop web applications, the features like the inversion of control and aspect-oriented programming and model view controller design paradigms, these are very much helpful to develop various applications, due to which Spring has become very popular and used commonly. Also, the Spring framework facilitates the integration with other popular frameworks like JSF and Struts. So, let's know a little bit information about JSF. JSF in the sense Java Server Faces. So, Struts, as we all, I think few of you might know struts. Struts are some platform independent MVC frameworks again. They are robust and scalable as well. They are used to develop the web applications. So basically Struts is developed by the Apache Software Foundation and JSF is developed by JCP or the Java Community Process. So first, this is just the overview on how it happens. Spring integration with JSF is through the variable resolver. Let's see what it is. It is the process to identify an object or being from a Spring application context. That is known as variable resolver. Next, the Spring integration with the struts is done to resolve the dependencies between the objects by using inversion of control and to obtain the Spring context. So, how it is done? That is done by using the Spring's action in an application. Now let's have a quick overview or little bit a kind of understanding of JSF framework. JSF framework is basically used to develop the web applications, as we already discussed. What it does, it helps developers to handle the tasks like user inputs, developing the UI components, and also it defines the page navigation in an application. So it means that it has a kind of UI development, that is, as we all know, text box is a mandatory for UI application, text box, list box, and how the UI components are binded with some model data. Sorry. Also, it also handles the user inputs, that is validation kind of a thing, and also it conveys if there is any error message, it will convey that to the client in the form of messages. So again, the JSF framework is based on MVC design pattern, that is model view controller architecture, in which the web application is separated into the model, view and controller. From developer's point of view, creating a particular web application using the MVC pattern, it is very simple and easy from the developer's point of view. But there are some various things involved, that is navigation from one page to another, handling the validations, error checking, all these things. So basically what all the JSF consists of? The JSS consists of these elements. You can call 5 elements. That is, it has UI component, that is how it appears to the user, HTML and cascading style sheets, and renderer. Renderer is basically an element that converts the internal representation of UI components into the output stream to handle a particular request. So basically these are translators between the client and server in web applications. Client in the sense, client sends a request to the server and server, as we all know, it sends a response. It will send a response in HTML format to the client's browser. So as we all know, HTML hypertext markup language is the language that is used for this purpose, that is sending back and the display of it. Then comes the validator. What exactly is validator? Validator is an element. It is also one of the elements of this JSF framework that checks and makes sure that the data entered by the user is in the correct format, that is within that particular range, and whether it is in the correct data format. For example, here as we can see, input text will have the name, it is a mandatory field required, and the length minimum should be 2, maximum can be 25, up till 25. So this is what is the code snippet or the syntax that is used there in JSF. So it performs the validation process inside the UI component. Also it does the validation interface. It also interacts with the validator interface. So here it is the length validator in this particular code snippet example we can see. Next comes the navigation. Navigation is another element of JSF wherein a web application which has multiple web pages and we need to move from one web page to another web page to search or collect some information. So this process of moving from one web page to another web page is known as navigation, and this navigation is defined within this navigation rule element. For every web page, navigation is used to define different outcomes. See, for example, if we are browsing, if it goes to it can go to the success page or the failure page. It cannot go to any other page. Only these two pages it can go. Either if it is successful, it can go to some another web page that is intended, or it can go to the failure page, that is page not found, or invalid page, or something like that. So that is error message. So navigation of this type is enclosed between the navigation rule element, within which we are having the login.jsp. If it from outcome success means go to welcome.jsp. If it is a failure means go back to login.jsp. For example, if the user has entered the wrong login, if the username is incorrect, or password is incorrect, or if he has not provided one, then it will go back to the login.jsp so that he has to retype it again. Next comes the message. Message is nothing but it is a summary of the error message, the complete information about the error. The message can be associated with the UI components. We can say, like, if we are entering any form like text box, checkbox and all, if we will have some text box which is very lengthy. For example, hobby summary. We are entering some application form where we are asked to enter our interests, hobbies or anything. So we will keep on typing on that. So up to some limit, it is more than few characters. So such things are called the messages. See, for example, here error message, the color should appear to, it should be red in color, style form is color colon red. So here this particular code snippet is the HTML message class wherein we can have a single message associated with that particular specific component. So here it also says about the error message here. So here this is also HTML message, but it is more than one message. Here it is only one single message. Next is the integration. Now let's understand the part of integration of Spring with JSF framework. So JSF framework is basically integrated with the Spring to access Spring's bean in a JSF page. We will access the Spring's bean in the JSF page. So the integration is basically focused on the concept of the bean definition. So how exactly it happens in the bean definition? It is based on that. So there are, as we all know, we are integrating two different frameworks for our usage. So there can be different format to define beans. So here what happens in Spring framework, we are having the bean element, angular brackets, and within that bean element. But in JSF framework, we are having managed bean element. Sorry. Managed bean element. So although the format looks different, the functionality or the concept is the same. It is bean, it is managed bean, but the functionality is the same. So how exactly is that managed bean appears? We will see that. Managed bean will also have a name, a class, and a scope. So we will see that later how it is done. But now let's only know that the managed bean also has name, a class, and a scope. So basically these two are very, very important. The integration of the Spring with the JSF, it is done by the two classes. If we remember these two classes, that might suffice. The first thing is the delegating variable resolver class and the faces context utils class. Delegating variable resolver class and the faces context utils class. So what exactly the delegating variable resolver class does? This class, it extends the JSF's variable resolver class. So the delegating variable resolver, it is used to, what it does is it will configure the managed bean. As we already discussed here, the managed bean is a bean element, nothing but bean element. How we have bean element, how we saw bean element in our previous slides. This managed bean is a bean element here in the JSF. So what this delegating variable resolver class does, it extends that particular JSF's variable resolver class, which is used to configure the manage bean. That is defined in the faces config.xml file. There is a separate XML file. From there it will configure. So this class also configures the Spring's managed beans by using the web application context interface. So let's see the code snippet here. See here what is happening is the faces config is the starting and ending element within which we are having the variable resolver. Variable resolver will have the path of the delegating variable resolver, and these or the default locales here, default locale and supported locales, and the message bundle. Next, let's see how the managed bean code snippet is shown. See, first is what is happening here. This comes under the faces config.xml file here. This is the faces config.xml file. This managed bean is defined inside that. How we do that is managed bean. After that, we are having the bean name, bean class and bean scope, whether it is a session. And this is bean class. This is a com.visualpath.this JSF managed bean. This is the name of the bean. And here this is defined using this JSF managed bean is defined using the managed bean name element, which is accessed by using the this business object is accessed this one value, this Spring managed bean business object by using this particular expression in a JSF code. This is accessed. Next is the faces context utils class. The faces context utils class, this is used in a condition where we need to specify the bean explicitly in a Spring application. So what is this class does is it retrieves the root of the web application context. That is an interface. As we all know, web application context is an interface. By using the faces context class and access the Spring context from the JSF code. So this, what we can imagine this as, this is somewhat similar to the web application context util class. And it has some methods, 3 methods if we can remember: get required web application context, get web application context, and get session mutex. They are used to use Spring context from that particular JSF code. So how that is done? Application context my context is equal to faces context utils dot get web application. This is a method, get application context dot get correct instance. So here my context is a context, Spring application context. It is object. This is retrieved from the get web application context method of which class? Of the faces context utils class. This we need to understand here. Next is, first let's understand what exactly is the struts framework. This is the next part, that is integration of Spring with the struts. Basically, struts is an open source framework. This framework is used to create web application based on the model view controller architecture. So basically what it does, even it is a very popular framework, and even I myself I have completed a project in using struts, and it is also a very powerful framework which is quite popular. And the struts framework, it is again based on the model view controller architecture. What exactly is that means? It separates the business logic code, web page design code, and navigational code into 3 different components, that is model, view, and controller. View, as we all know, it's the web page design or the user interface. Model is basically where we are having the business logic and the navigational code. Next, why we need MVC architecture is it helps in maintaining the large web applications. That is what one of the advantage. So this struts framework, it has a lot of tags, dynamic data is created, and there is something called struts HTML.tag library descriptor and all it is having. So the components of struts framework, what are all the components of struts framework we need to understand right now? The action servlet class, the action class, action form class, and the struts config.xml file. So let's see one by one. The action servlet class, it is a controller of the struts framework that receives the requests from the user and decides where to send that particular request. So what is the goal of this is to map that particular request, that is uniform resource locator URI, to an appropriate action, to give an action to it by using the mapping provided in. So it will again look into the structsconfig.xml every time for this. So all the client requests go through this controller action servlet. Next is the action class. The action class is an adapter between the incoming HTTP request and the corresponding business logic that is executed to process this request. So this class, action class, implements the business logic of the struts application. In other words, this action class behaves as the wrappers of the business logic is what we can say, which helps it in interacting with the model. That is, it interacts with the action form of the struts application. Action form is nothing but the model, or the, we can say simply as the getters and setters of setters of the Java, that is the data fields of a particular application. So again, these action forms are also defined in the strutsconfig.xml for the appropriate mapping. Everything will be mentioned within the strutsconfig.xml file. So now let's understand what exactly strutsconfig.xml file consists of. It is a basically struts configuration file. It contains the transformation and configuration information of the struts application. Transformation, which page it is going to, which mapping it is going to, and the configuration of the struts application. Various information like the action, it will have the information about action, classes, and the interceptors. That is what we need to know. The next topic is understanding of the integration. How exactly, what are all the terminologies used on what is the process that is covered in order to integrate the Spring framework with the Struts framework. So first let's understand what exactly is Struts. Struts is a web MVC framework. That is, it is the only thing. But Spring, as we all know, it has a lot of sub frameworks and paradigms like the AOP, inversion of control, MVC, everything combined together. So we integrate the struts framework with the Spring application to create and populate struts action, which is very important to retrieve the Spring's beans. So for that we need to know the two most important classes, that is context loader plugin class and action support class. The context loader plugin class is basically the struts plugin which loads the Spring's application context in a Spring application. The name of Spring's application context depends upon the name of the action servlet class that is present in the web.xml file, and it is always suffixed with -servlet.xml. See, for example, if we are saying the action servlet class is defined in web.xml. The name of it is servlet name actions / servlet name. Then what happens is the action servlet.xml is the name of the Spring application, Spring context file. So here what it has combined, -servlet.xml, it has combined with it. Let's see now how exactly we configure this one context loader plugin class in the struts config.xml. So how we do that is plugin class name org.spring framework web.struts context loader plugin. So the location of this particular context configuration file, like the action servlet.xml and application context.xml, is defined by the context config location, this one, context config location property of the plugin element. So this is the code snippet for it. Here what is happening here is the here if we see context loader plugin, this class loads all the context files like the application context.xml and the action servlet.xml. So after this configuration is performed, this context loader plugin and that particular struts config.xml will configure the struts action class. Sorry. That action class is managed by the Spring framework. So there are two important classes to configure the struts action class, that is delegating request processor class and the delegating action proxy class. So what exactly is the delegating requester processor class? This class is the subclass of the struts request processor class. This class searches the struts actions class in the Spring's application context by using the context loader plugin class. So how can we configure this particular class? We need to override, if we can see here, we need to override this processor class. Processor class property. If we override, this belongs to a particular controller element in our struts config.xml class. So how can we show that this is the code snippet for the same? Set property processor class value is equal to org.springframework.web.struts delegating request processor. This helps in understanding how do we configure the delegating request processor class in that particular struts config.xml. The struts action, what it does, it automatically searches that particular web application context of that particular Spring application. So we need to specify the action as well in the struts config. That is how it is defined here. That is action path is equal to /login type com.visualpath.my action in order to delegate that particular action B in the context loader plugin class. The second class is the delegating action proxy class. This delegating action proxy class of the Spring framework is used to configure the struts action class. This is used with the type attribute of the action element. See, for example, when we do not want to use this delegating request processor class to configure the struts action class, we can use this delegating action proxy class with a type attribute of the action element. So we can see this following code snippet. Action path is equal to /login. Type is what, and the scope is what, and the forward name is what, list or search. See here what it is doing, the delegating action proxy class. It specifies the struts action class and accesses a Spring's bean contained in the application context.xml by using the context loader plugin class. Next comes the second important part in integration of the struts with the Springs, that is the action support class. Action support class is an abstract implementation of the Strings action class. So what this action support class has is the get web application context method. So in order to retrieve the Spring's application context by using this content loader plugin class. So what it does here, if we see the code snippet here, it does the getBean method here. It uses the getBean method to access the bean from a Spring application context. So here this code snippet cleanly it neatly shows how to use the action support class to access beans from the Spring's application context. In this example, what is happening is if we consider this employee list action, this is a class that needs the employee service class. This one. It calls the getWebApplication context method to get a reference to the Spring application context. So what happens, the reference my context here, this is the reference of the application context. It interfaces, it calls the getBean method here. See, we can see here getBean method to retrieve the Spring managed bean, that is employee service. This is how it is done. Okay, thank you.